Snow lashed the northern face of the ridge like the land itself wanted to bury the night. Rhett Washakie gripped the reins tighter as the wind screamed through the canyon past the edges of his wool coat, cracking with frost. His gelding Smoke danced beneath him skittish in the rising squall. They were still a mile out from the ranch house, and the storm was rolling in faster than expected, fast enough to feel unnatural. He'd come out alone to check on a downed pine threatening the west fence line. What he found instead was a fresh set of tracks' hoof prints that didn't belong to any horse he owned, pressed deep and wide into the snow like whoever rode it wasn't in a hurry. Not one of his men. No reason for anyone to be out here now unless they were lost or looking to cause trouble. The valley below had gone near silent under the weight of the storm, and Rhett didn't like that either. Snowstorms this early in the season had a way of catching folks off guard. He'd seen more than one drifter freeze in their boots come spring thaw. Still, that wasn't his concern. Not anymore. Not since he'd built the ranch into what it was, his own fortress of timber stone and silence. The world could howl, beg, and burn. He was done letting it in. A rifle cracked. It came from downwind, the sharp pop echoing off the ridgeline. Smoke reared slightly, ears flattening, and Rhett's hand went straight to the revolver at his side. He scanned the tree line, heart steady, but his breath fogging fast in the freezing air. The sound hadn't been close, but it hadn't been far either. Hunters didn't fire in this weather. Poachers, maybe, or something worse. He waited. Nothing. No movement. Just the snow thickening around him. "Let's move," he muttered to Smoke, spurring the gelding back toward the ranch. By the time the gates came into view, the drifts had swallowed half the trail. Wind whipped through the iron bars, and his eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. Smoke stopped short, nostrils flaring. At the far end of the long path that led to the front of the ranch house, the snow had been disturbed. A shape small upright was slumped against the post of the main gate. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hand near the revolver. One step, then another. It was a woman. Blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, face barely visible beneath a hood caked in snow. Her boots were cracked leather soles worn near through. No horse. No luggage. No sound, just her shallow breaths pushing out mist into the air like a fragile animal caught in winter's mouth. She didn't look up when he approached, just whispered, "Not dead yet," like it was a joke only she could hear. Rhett crouched down in front of her, sharp gaze sweeping her face. Pale. Lips blue. She'd been out here too long. "You alone?" he asked, voice low. "Always," she said hoarsely. Behind him, the front door creaked open. Jed Greyfeather stepped out into the windcoat snapping around his frame. He took one look at the woman and muttered, "Hell." "She walk here?" Rhett asked without turning. Jed nodded once. No tracks but hers. "She came up from the river road. On foot. She's half frozen. She's still breathing." Rhett stared at her a moment longer. She didn't ask for help. Didn't plead. Just leaned her head back against the wood and closed her eyes like she was deciding whether waking up was still worth it. "Get Eula," Rhett said curtly. "Tell her to prep the kitchen. And bring the spare cot near the stove." Jed didn't question him. Just turned and jogged back up the steps. The woman shifted slightly. "I didn't come begging," she rasped. "You look like you came dying." She gave a tired huff of breath that might have been a laugh. "You got a name?" he asked. Her eyes opened piercing and clear beneath the grime. "Naomi. Naomi Spotted Horse." He waited. "That enough?" she said. "For now." He slid an arm under hers, lifting her gently but firmly to her feet. She staggered, once weight feather-light body trembling. He didn't like how brittle she felt, like if he let go, the wind might scatter her to dust. They stepped inside. The warmth hit like a wave. Eula Manygoats had already lit the stove to full flame. The smell of black coffee and juniper filled the air. Jed set the cot down near the hearth, while Eula came forward with a thick blanket and a glare sharp enough to cut bone. "Don't put your boots on my clean floor," she barked at Rhett. "She's half dead, and now she's in my kitchen. So I'm in charge." Naomi didn't argue as Eula guided her to the cot. She didn't thank them either, just nodded once and curled in toward the heat, like a woman who understood that warmth was not something you earned with words. Rhett poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Jed, watching Naomi from the doorway. The flicker of firelight brought out the chapped lines in her hands, the split in her lower lip, the bruises half hidden by layers of cloth. "She say what she wants?" Jed asked. "Not yet. She another one of Harrow's schemes. She's not dressed for trickery." Jed sipped the coffee and leaned against the doorframe. "You know what they'll say in town. Woman shows up at your gate half frozen, no horse, no reason." Rhett's jaw tightened. "They already talk. You gonna let her stay? She ain't asked to." Jed raised an eyebrow. "And if she does," Rhett didn't answer. Instead, he stared into the flames and thought of all the women who had arrived in wagons with painted smiles, with trunks full of silk and sweet words. They came looking for the land, the house the man behind the Washakie name. None of them had ever come on foot, bleeding silence. Naomi Spotted Horse had arrived with frost on her lashes and no story to sell, and somehow that was the most dangerous thing of all. Outside, the storm raged louder. Inside, for the first time in years, Rhett felt something shift. Not trust, not yet, but curiosity, and that was a start. "You don't have to trust me, Mr. Washakie. I'm not here for trust. I'm here for work and warmth if it's going." Naomi's voice, dry as driftwood and twice as brittle, filled the kitchen the next morning. She stood with her arms folded across her chest, blanket gone, face-washed, boots dried beside the stove. The borrowed flannel shirt she wore hung off her frame like it didn't know how to fit a woman who refused to bend. Rhett stood across from her coffee mug, in hand steam curling between them like something alive. He had been expecting something different, pleading softness, some subtle angle. Instead, he got the steady, unflinching gaze of a woman who'd spent the night beneath his roof and didn't seem the least bit shaken by it. Eula hovered near the stove, stirring oatmeal, her mouth set in a line that said she was listening, even if she wasn't looking. "What kind of work?" Rhett asked. "Whatever needs doing. You ride, I can saddle, shoe muck, mend tack, and shoot if need be. You clean, I've cleaned messes bigger than this house. Kitchens, cellars, human habits." Rhett raised an eyebrow. "Manage a ledger." Naomi's jaw flexed once. "I taught arithmetic on the reservation school near Laramie." Before. The word landed with weight and left no explanation. Rhett didn't press. He glanced toward Eula, who still hadn't said a word. Eula gave a snort. "Kitchen's mine. But I could use help keeping the house straight. Jed's boys track enough mud in here to build a second barn. And I'm too old to chase them with a broom." Naomi didn't smile, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Then I'll sweep faster than they track." Rhett drained the rest of his coffee and set the cup down. 2-week trial. Work hard, don't stir trouble, you stay. Same pay as the other hands. Room and board included. Naomi nodded once. No thanks. No smile. Just calm acceptance, like she was shaking hands with her own shadow. "Any expectations beyond labor?" Rhett said evenly. "You should leave them at the door." "Already did," Naomi replied. Eula passed her a bowl of steaming oatmeal. Naomi took it, sat quietly at the side table, and began to eat with neat, efficient motions. She didn't devour it, didn't linger, just filled the silence with the rhythm of a woman used to doing everything with purpose. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a hard crust of snow and an ice-bitten sky. Rhett pulled on his coat and gloves and stepped out into the crisp morning. Hoofbeats echoed from the corral as Jed called to the hands to saddle up for the day's work. Steam poured from the barn roof and crows circled overhead. He didn't know what he'd expected from Naomi's spotted horse, but it wasn't the steady presence he now felt, moving inside his home like she already understood its bones better than most. By mid-afternoon, she'd scrubbed the mud from the main hall, cleared out the back pantry, and started reordering supplies with an eye for function instead of tradition. She spoke little, asked nothing, and moved like she didn't want to disturb the silence. Eula watched from the kitchen doorway. "Girl's got bones of stone," she muttered to Rhett when he passed through to grab his ledgers. "Doesn't flinch, doesn't beg. I like her." Rhett said nothing. That night, after the men ate, Naomi sat on the back step with a wash basin and began mending a torn coat one of the wranglers had tossed aside. She didn't ask permission. She didn't comment on the quality of the stitchwork. She just worked lit by the dim orange glow spilling from the kitchen window behind her. Jed stopped by with a mug of hot tea. "You always patch things that aren't yours." Naomi didn't look up. "If I leave it, someone else gets cold. If I fix it, nobody does." Jed grunted approval. "Eula says you used to teach. I did. Why stop? Things changed." He didn't ask what. Naomi didn't offer more. Inside, Rhett watched the exchange through the kitchen window, the steam from his tea curling over the glass. There was something different about this woman, not just her silence, but the way she existed in the quiet. No fidgeting, no sideways glances, no desperation, just presence. Like she didn't need to prove she deserved space, only to occupy it with purpose. Later, as the house dimmed and the men retired to the bunkhouse, Rhett walked through the hall, the sound of his boots echoing over freshly scrubbed floors. Naomi's coat hung near the back door, a faded strip of fabric sewn onto the inner lining, tribal stitching Wind River pattern Northern Arapaho, if he guessed right. It spoke more about her than anything she'd said. He found her in the sitting room stacking books that had been left gathering dust near the hearth. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "Most women who come here try to change the curtains first," he said. Naomi placed another book on the shelf. "Curtains don't hold value. Knowledge does. You like books, I like quiet things that speak when you listen right." Rhett tilted his head slightly. "You think I'm quiet? I think you've forgotten how to speak without defending something." Her words weren't an insult, just observation. Measured, intentional. "You always talk like that," he asked. "Only when I'm not paid to be quiet." He couldn't help the short laugh that slipped out, surprised, honest. Naomi glanced over her shoulder, that same flicker behind her gaze returning softer now. He nodded toward the shelf. "You see one you want, it's yours to borrow." She looked over the spines for a long moment, before reaching for a slim volume of Dickinson poetry. Worn, weathered pages, soft at the corners. "I'll read this one slow," she said. "It deserves slowness." Rhett watched her cross the room, the book held lightly in her hand, like something sacred. As the fire burned lower, and the snow groaned under its own weight outside, he felt it again, that unfamiliar thread of curiosity tugging loose inside him. He told himself it was harmless. She would work her weeks and move on. But as he climbed the stairs, the memory of her voice followed him. "I'm not here for trust." And yet he was starting to give it anyway. Downstairs, Naomi opened the book to the first page and read by firelight, lips moving silently. The cold had lifted, but something deeper was beginning to stir in its place. "I ain't never seen a woman cut wood like that and not curse the axe, the wind, or her man. You sure you're not hiding some kind of storm under all that calm?" Jed leaned against the porch rail, chewing on a piece of hay, watching Naomi as she swung the axe in clean, practiced strokes. The wood cracked in half, thudded onto the stacked pile beside her. Her shirt clung damp to her back sleeves, rolled past her elbows, and sweat glinted along her brow. She hadn't paused for nearly an hour. Naomi didn't answer right away. She adjusted the next log with her boot, set it up straight, and lifted the axe again. "Storms don't scare me," she finally said. "People do." Jed blinked. That wasn't the kind of answer he was used to getting from anyone, let alone someone who'd been half frozen in a snowdrift just days ago. He pulled his coat tighter. "Rhett doesn't know what to make of you yet. You know that I don't need making sense of. You don't think he's trying to protect his own peace?" Naomi split another log and let the pieces fall with a finality that made it feel like the end of the conversation. Inside, Eula clanked pots in the kitchen, humming under her breath. She'd taken to giving Naomi short lists of things to fix, mend, or scrub, without repeating herself a quiet show of trust. That morning, Naomi had already polished the window glass, aired out the upstairs linens, and started organizing the root cellar inventory. Rhett had noticed it too. She didn't just work. She anticipated, and that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He stood in the hallway, ledger in hand, watching her through the glass, her strength, her solitude. The men talked about her now in the barn, quiet speculation about where she came from, who she'd been. No one dared ask directly. At dinner, the tension hummed low beneath the table. The air in the ranch house always softened after dark, as if the walls listened and held secrets for the right moment. Naomi sat near the fireplace with her usual plate of stew, careful not to overeat, careful not to linger. That night, Rhett approached her for the first time with a different question. "Who taught you how to swing an axe like that?" She looked up at him slowly. "My uncle. He raised me." "Arapaho." She nodded once. "From Wind River before the schools, before they cut the braids and broke the tongue." Rhett didn't flinch. He knew the truth of that history too well. He'd ridden through it, bought cattle from broken tribes, witnessed the scars. He pulled out a chair. "You ever think of going back? There's nothing left to go back to." Naomi's voice held no bitterness, only a quiet resignation. It struck Rhett harder than he expected. So many of the women who came through here, they had pasts full of noise stories, loud with tragedy or grievance. Naomi's past lived like a shadow, present but never demanding attention. "You think this is where you're staying?" he asked, more curious than accusing. "I think it's where I am. I don't pretend to know more than that." The answer didn't satisfy him, but it was honest. Before he could say more, the back door opened, and a pair of boots clomped in. A gust of wind chased in snowflakes behind it. A boy of about 10 stood there, face red from cold hair stuck under a crooked cap. He was panting as if he'd run miles. "You Mr. Washakie?" the boy asked. "I am. Mama says to come. She says Pa's been drunk 3 days straight and now he's threatening her and the baby." Rhett's chair scraped the floor. Naomi was already on her feet. "Where?" Rhett asked. "Up the ridge, second homestead by the pine split." Mama said, "Hurry." Jed burst in behind the boy, having heard enough from outside. "I'll ready the horse." Rhett grabbed his coat, strapped his revolver to his hip, and met Jed at the door. Naomi was already wrapping a blanket around the boy. "Stay here," Rhett told her. "I'm coming." "No, you're not. I've seen what drunken rage can do. You might need more than a gun." Their eyes locked, and for a moment Rhett felt something move in his chest, something unsteady and unfamiliar. But she wasn't wrong. They rode out hard through the dark, Naomi riding behind Jed. The wind tore through the branches above and snow fell in wet slush. When they reached the homestead, the cabin door hung open, light flickering inside. A woman clutched a crying baby in the corner, while a man staggered in the center of the room, swinging a bottle, yelling curses that made the walls tremble. Rhett stepped in first, calm and steady. The man turned toward him, bottle raised. Rhett didn't draw his weapon. He didn't need to. His voice was enough. "Put it down, Royce. You know who I am." The man hesitated, blinking. "I said, put it down." Royce let the bottle slip from his hand. It shattered at his feet. Naomi stepped past Rhett and went straight to the woman. She took the baby, soothed it against her chest, and nodded to the mother. "You're safe now. He's done." Back at the ranch, hours later, Rhett poured water over the hearth coals and sat in silence. Naomi stood nearby, rocking the baby until the mother had calmed enough to take her back. He watched Naomi in the firelight. The same stillness, the same depth. "You ever see someone that broken before?" he asked. Naomi didn't blink. "I've been someone that broken before." Rhett looked at her not with pity, but with recognition, with something deeper than he knew how to say aloud. She didn't need him to speak. She handed him a blanket and walked past without another word. The baby slept peacefully now, and somewhere something fragile but real began to form, not between them, but around them. A quiet understanding, the kind only survivors share. Folks who walk around with pain in their eyes ain't looking for pity, they're looking for a place it's safe to set it down. The snow had come back overnight, soft and heavy, blanketing the valley like a prayer whispered by the land itself. Naomi rose before dawn, drawn to the window by the thick silence. The world outside was still blue-gray and luminous under the rising sun. She could feel it in her chest, the hush before something shifted. Downstairs, the smell of fresh biscuits drifted from the kitchen, where Eula stirred batter with her usual calm. Naomi tied her braid back, slipped on her boots, and stepped out to the barn. The frost cracked beneath her steps. Rhett's horse was already gone, tracks leading out toward the northern fence line. Inside the barn, the air was warmer. Horses nickered low, and the wood creaked softly, as if adjusting to the weight of the storm pressing on the roof. She fed the stock, checked the hay bins, and moved with practiced ease through the morning chores. But her thoughts kept circling Rhett, how quiet he'd been since they returned from the homestead rescue. Not distant, just guarded. As if something had settled behind his ribs that he hadn't decided what to do with. Jed appeared at the barn door, rubbing sleep from his eyes and yawning like a bear pulled out of hibernation. "You always up this early?" he muttered. Didn't have much choice sleeping outside. He scratched his head and gave a sheepish grin. "Fair. You settled in fast, though. Eula says you fold linens tighter than a preacher's conscience." Naomi chuckled once. "Old habits. Where'd you learn all that anyway?" Naomi paused. "Life. Places you don't stay long in. People who don't ask names." Jed nodded slowly. He didn't press. Instead, he pointed behind him with his thumb. "Got a stranger at the gate. Says he's looking for the ranch boss." Naomi stiffened. "What kind of stranger?" "Not one of ours? Clean clothes, soft hands. From town, maybe? Looks like he ain't worked a day past ink and ledgers." She followed Jed toward the front gate, where a tall man stood next to a polished buggy. His overcoat was wool, his boots too clean for the snow. "Can I help you?" Naomi asked. The man raised an eyebrow, not expecting her. "I'm looking for Mr. Rhett Washakie. Is he here? He's out riding fence. I'll wait." Naomi didn't move. State your business. The man seemed to hesitate, then extended a hand she didn't take. My name is Silas Quinn, attorney from Cheyenne. I represent several estates along the river valley, and there's a matter of I'll let Rhett speak to that. Silas studied her. And you are house help. He narrowed his eyes. Unusual house help. Naomi turned and walked away without another word. Rhett didn't return until midday. Snow dusted his shoulders as he stepped off, his hoarse expression unreadable as Naomi met him at the stable. There's a man waiting at the house, she said. Says he's an attorney. Rhett wiped his gloves, clean jaw tightening. Silas Quinn. That's him. Tell Eula to set out some coffee. Strong. Rhett entered the house like a man walking into a courtroom. Silas stood from his chair and offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Washakie. Still out here doing God's work in the snow, Rhett ignored the comment. Say what you came to say. Silas opened his satchel and pulled out a folder. The river valley east of your land is being petitioned for development. There's talk of a rail spur, maybe even a telegraph expansion. You've got claims sitting on the edge of what could become very profitable territory. Rhett folded his arms. And you want me to sell? I want you to consider your options. Men have been paid handsomely for less. I'm not interested. Silas leaned forward. You should be. Land like yours with its mineral rights and timber access. This land belonged to my grandfather. It was carved with blood and treaties barely honored. I'm not giving it up for some Eastern syndicate's dream of expansion. Silas's smile sharpened. You may not have a choice. There are legal claims being reviewed. Old boundaries poorly marked. If you don't play smart, someone else might claim what's yours. I'd like to see them try. Naomi stood just beyond the doorway, unseen, but listening. Her breath caught as she realized the real danger. This wasn't about a ranch. It was about erasing what little heritage had survived the flood of change sweeping westward. Silas packed up, sensing he wouldn't win the fight today. I'll be in Cheyenne through winter, he said. Think it over. Or don't. Either way, things are changing. That night, Rhett sat on the porch alone, wine curling around his boots. Naomi joined him, silent for a while until the words came. He's right, isn't he? About the land. Rhett didn't look at her. He's right that they're coming. Doesn't mean they get to take what's ours. You can fight it, I can try. Naomi looked out across the white valley, so still and quiet now. What if they don't come with laws and paper next time? What if they come with force? Then we stand. The way he said it, firm, resolute, made something deep inside her settle. She'd run so long, hid in alleys, ducked under bridges, vanished into crowds. But here, for the first time, she wondered what it would be like to stay and fight. Not for herself, for something bigger. For land that still held memories and names not yet lost. Behind them, Eula's light flickered in the window. Jed snored softly in the bunkhouse. The world felt both fragile and solid. Naomi wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I can stand too, she said. Rhett turned to her eyes, catching hers in the dark. I know. I don't need you to rescue me, Rhett. I need you to believe I'd already survived worse. Naomi stood in the barn's back doorway, her fingers still clenched from the dream she'd just woken from, breath catching like a caught thread. The wind outside howled against the boards, but it was nothing compared to the screams that still echoed in her chest. She closed her eyes, counted to 10, then 20. When she opened them, dawn's light was barely seeping over the horizon. The cold washed over her as she stepped out toward the creek, needing to move to shake it off. But with each footfall, memories pressed closer. The alley behind the Kansas City Inn. The man's hand gripping her collar. The the sound of her own voice cracking not with fear, but with fury. She stopped near the frozen bank and dropped to her knees. Her fingers curled into the snow. Then just as quietly, she pressed her palms together. "You don't get to own me anymore?" She whispered to no one. "Not my voice, not my future, not this place." The words were almost enough. Behind her, the snow crunched under boots. She didn't flinch. She'd come to know Rhett's gait even in the wind. "You're out early," he said, voice low. "Couldn't sleep." He crouched beside her, not crowding, not asking. "Bad dreams." She nodded, silent. "I've had 'em too. War loss. Things a man buries till they rot inside." Naomi turned her head. "Did you ever stop burying? I stopped pretending I didn't remember." She drew in a shaky breath. "There's things about me you don't know. Things you might not want to. I don't scare easy. It ain't about scaring. It's about trusting that I ain't broken." He met her eyes. "You're not." She looked away. "You say that now." They sat in quiet for a moment until Naomi stood and brushed the snow off. "I'll fetch kindling. Eula's gonna need more for the stove." He didn't stop her, but his eyes followed her all the way back to the barn. By midday, the house buzzed with quiet energy. Eula was baking bread again, her way of holding the home steady, and Jed was sorting supplies, whistling off-key, but with heart. Rhett saddled 2 horses and found Naomi near the chicken coop, sleeves, rolled up, grit smudged on her cheek. "Come with me," he said. "Where to? The North Ridge. There's something I want to show you." She hesitated, then nodded, grabbing her coat. They rode in silence for most of the trail. Snow swirled lightly around them, sun peeking through gauzy clouds. The land stretched wide, pale golds and silvers under the weak winter light. They reached a ledge where the trees broke, revealing the valley below. Naomi pulled her horse to a stop, stunned. Below, nestled near the river bend, was a small wooden cabin, weathered but strong. Its chimney leaned slightly. Smoke no longer rose, but the wood still held shape, defiant against time. "It was my grandmother's," Rhett said. "She built it herself, raised 3 kids there after her husband was killed in the Creek War." Naomi blinked. Alone, mostly. The town didn't lift a finger to help her. Said a native woman was better off leaving. What did she do? She stayed, worked the land, built her fences stronger than theirs. Didn't ask for permission. Naomi turned to him, breath catching again. "Why show me this?" Because she lived a truth most folks don't see till too late. That you don't survive by waiting for someone to fix the world. You survive by standing up inside it. Naomi looked back down at the cabin. "She sounds like someone who didn't apologize for breathing." Rhett's voice softened. "Just like you." Something cracked open in her chest. She lowered her gaze. "I want to tell you the truth. All of it." Rhett waited quiet as snow falling. "I was promised to a man. Not by choice. He owned the boarding house I worked at. Said my debts meant my body was his to sell. When I ran, he hunted me. Said I stole what was his me." Rhett's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I got away the last time with nothing but a burn scar and $2 tucked in my shoe. The next town didn't care what I'd been through. They just wanted me gone. And that's when you found the ranch. I wasn't looking to stay. I was just tired of running. You're not running now." "No." She looked at him. "And I don't want to go back to being someone folks look through like smoke. I want to be someone who leaves something behind." Rhett nodded. "You already are." Naomi stepped down from her horse, snow crunching beneath her. She walked toward the edge of the overlook, arms wrapped tight around herself, more from the moment than the cold. "I can't give you sweetness, Rhett. Not like the women you could have married. I'm not soft or untouched. I don't need sweetness, he said. I need truth, grit, fire, and someone who understands silence. She turned slowly. You sure you ain't just trying to rescue me? He stepped forward. I don't need you to be rescued. I need you to believe you're worth more than surviving. Naomi's breath hitched. No man had ever said that. No man had ever meant it. She looked up at him and for the first time didn't look away. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of pine and frozen river. Below the cabin stood quiet, a monument not of weakness but of endurance. Naomi squared her shoulders. I want to help, however I can. With the land with Quinn, with the fight that's coming. You already are, Rhett said. They rode back slow with fewer words, but deeper meaning. That evening, Eula passed Naomi a folded cloth. Inside were needles, thread, and old muslin scraps. I figured you'd want to stitch your own mark into the quilts, she said simply. Naomi traced the edge of the cloth throat tight. A home. She hadn't expected to find one. But maybe she had. And as the fire cracked and snow whispered against the glass, the pieces of her past began to settle, not vanish, not erase, but take new shape. Because there in a valley where history was carved into the soil, Naomi had finally stopped vanishing. She'd begun to live. You want a war, Emery? Then come out of the dark like a man, because I don't hide. The sun had barely stretched its fingers across the ridge when the rider appeared. Rhett spotted him first, just a dark speck where the snow met the tree line, a slow-moving shape too deliberate for a traveler and too brazen for someone with innocent business. The horse was lean, mean-looking. The rider wore a wide-brimmed hat, pulled low, and he wasn't carrying anything subtle, 2 rifles slung on either side, like an invitation. By the time the man reached the yard, Eula was already on the porch, arms crossed, watching like the ghost of justice itself. Naomi stood just inside the barn pitchfork, still in her grip, barely breathing. Rhett walked out to meet him. The man slid off his horse spurs, biting the snow. His face was long and narrow mouth curled with contempt. You Rhett Colton? Rhett nodded. You're on my land. Not for long. Rhett didn't flinch. Say what you came to say. Name's Maris. Emery's man. He says you're fencing over boundary that ain't yours. That's a lie. Maris chuckled. Funny thing about lies when a man like Emery tells one townsfolk, listen. You tell Emery this is creek land, surveyed proper. My father bought it with blood and paper both. Tell him yourself. He's riding this way soon. Rhett's eyes narrowed. That a threat, Maris grinned. Call it a courtesy. Before Rhett could speak again, Naomi stepped out from the barn, her jaw set. Then give your boss another courtesy. Tell him the girl he tried to sell off's still breathing. And she ain't scared of shadows anymore. Maris turned. His smirk faded, replaced by something colder. Well, I'll be damned. Didn't know you'd landed here, sweetheart. Don't call me that. His eyes glinted with cruel humor. You really think this place can save you? I don't need saving. But you might. Rhett took a step forward. Mount up, now! Maris spat in the snow, but swung up onto his horse. You should think on what's coming, Colton. Emery's tired of waiting. So am I, Rhett replied. Maris turned and rode off, hooves cutting a dark path across the fresh snow. Inside the house fell into quiet motion. Jed double-checked the locks on the cellar door, muttering about cartridge stock. Eula laid out the old revolver she hadn't touched since her husband passed. Naomi moved from room to room, tightening the curtains and memorizing blind spots like she'd been born a sentry. You knew he'd come, she said to Rhett as he brought in more firewood. I hoped I was wrong. Emery's not just after land. No, Rhett said. He wants what he thinks he's owed. Naomi leaned against the kitchen table. He tried to destroy my body, but men like him, they always come for more than flesh. They want to own fear. Rhett looked at her. Then let's give him none. That night around the hearth, the four of them made a plan. It wasn't much. No cavalry, no sheriff worth his tin, but it was solid. We fight smart, Rhett said. We don't engage unless we must. Naomi, you stay by the cabin. Eula, watch the windows. Jed and I will patrol in shifts. I can fight, Naomi said. Rhett didn't argue. I know you can, but if Emery sees you're still here standing, then he loses before a shot's fired. Rhett nodded. Later, after the house quieted, Naomi found herself on the porch again. The moonlight turned the snow to silver, and in the hush of the valley, every sound carried meaning. Rhett joined her coat over his shoulders. You were brave today. I was angry, she replied. Still am. That's not a weakness. Naomi exhaled. I thought I'd be safe here. But safety ain't a place. It's a decision. He looked at her. Are you staying? She met his gaze. I am. He nodded slowly like he already knew. Then you should know. Emery's done more than threaten us. He's been bribing the council. There's a chance he'll claim the deed's fraudulent. Naomi clenched her jaw. And what, get the land taken out from under you or burned from beneath us? Her hand tightened on the porch railing. I left once, she said. Ran to survive. But this time, if I leave, I lose more than freedom. I lose who I became. You're not leaving. Naomi turned to him, fire in her voice. Then when he comes, Rhett, we don't just hold the line. We show him what standing looks like. The next morning came with a leaden sky and wind that stung the skin. But it was the kind of cold that sharpened the senses. Every footstep, every creak of the fence felt like a declaration. Naomi strapped on the pistol Eula had lent her. It felt heavier than she expected, but fitting. Just before dawn broke fully, Rhett stepped out with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a small bundle in hand. What's that? Naomi asked. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a metal pendant shaped like a hawk in flight. Old, worn, carved by hand. My grandmother's, he said. She gave it to my mother, and my mother gave it to me. When we needed courage, we held it. Naomi stared at it. You're giving it to me? Rhett shook his head. I'm letting you borrow it. You'll give it back after. She took it with reverence, fingers trembling slightly as she clasped it around her neck. Thank you. He looked at her, voice steady. You want a war, Emery? Then come out of the dark like a man, because I don't hide. A shadow moved on the far ridge. Naomi reached for her coat. It begins. When a man builds something with his hands, he won't let snakes slither through the walls and call it theirs. The cold didn't break. It only settled deeper like a heavy breath across the land. Frost glistened on the porch rails, and thin smoke curled up from the chimney into the slate-colored sky. By mid-morning, the stillness had a weight to it, like something waiting to snap. Rhett stood in the yard, boots planted in the hard-packed snow eyes fixed on the tree line. Beside him, Jed loaded the last of the shells into a battered wooden crate. The boy had stopped speaking much since the encounter with Maris, but the way his jaw clenched showed he understood what was coming. Rhett reached out and squeezed his shoulder. You sure? Jed nodded. I won't let him take it. Inside the cabin, Naomi moved through the house with sharp purpose, checking every latch and angle like she was drawing a map into her bones. She felt the heat of the pendant against her chest, Rhett's grandmother's hawk, and with every heartbeat she imagined it flying forward. Eula was in the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, though she wasn't cooking. She was writing something down on the back of a tobacco tin label with a shaking pencil. Her will, maybe, or a letter to be found in case things went wrong. Naomi didn't ask. By noon, hooves thundered. 8 riders. They came slow and wide across the snow-covered road like they owned it. Emery at the front, sitting stiff-backed and smug on a coal-black gelding. Maris rode behind him, rifle in plain view, and the others rough men with squinted eyes and bandanas at their throats fanned out like a noose. Rhett stepped forward. "This is private land," he called. Emery didn't stop until his horse's breath ghosted into Rhett's space. He leaned forward in the saddle. "That fence you put up tears through my rightful tract." "No, it doesn't. I've got the land patent and boundary survey. Old papers," Emery scoffed, "filed by a man buried 6 feet deep. And I've got newer claims. County clerk's already leaning my way. Then take it to court." Emery's lip curled. "I prefer simpler resolutions." "You mean threats. I mean force, if it comes to that." Rhett didn't budge. When a man builds something with his hands, he won't let snakes slither through the walls and call it theirs. Emery smiled like a snake might. "You want a war over some frozen land and a woman who don't belong to you?" Naomi stepped out before Rhett could answer. She stood tall beside him, coat open just enough to reveal the revolver at her waist. "I don't belong to anyone," she said, "but if you step 1 inch farther, I'll show you what I do with cowards." Emery turned in his saddle, half laughing. "Now she talks like a ranch wife." "How sweet," ranch woman Naomi corrected. "And this land's worth more than whatever you think you're owed. It's home." Emery's amusement faded, and for a moment the wind stopped. Behind them, Jed came to the porch with his own rifle. Eula followed, pistol in both hands. Emery scanned them all. "You going to die for this land?" No Rhett said. "We're going to live for it. And we're going to outlast you." There was something unsettling about their steadiness. No begging, no panic. Just people ready. Maris leaned toward Emery. "We can burn the barn. They'll run then." Naomi took a step forward. "You try that and we'll put your horses down first." Rhett's voice followed hers. "This ends one of 2 ways, Emery. You ride back and let the courts decide. Or you fire the first shot and make yourself an outlaw." Emery's gaze flickered between them. He hadn't expected resistance so unified. Maybe he thought Naomi would still tremble like she did when she was under his roof. Maybe he thought Rhett was just a quiet rancher with soft hands and no fight left. But the eyes facing him now were steel. He turned his horse slowly. "You'll regret this." "No," Naomi said. "But you might." Emery turned and galloped off. His men followed, though Maris lingered just long enough to spit near the fence. "You got lucky," he said. Naomi smiled grimly. "We made our luck," and then he was gone. That evening, the ranch sat heavy in the aftermath. No one celebrated. No one loosened their grip. It felt like a round had passed without gunfire, but the war hadn't ended, just shifted shape. Rhett walked the fence line again, measuring distances, checking weak posts. Naomi joined him halfway around, hands stuffed into her coat. "They'll try something else," she said. "Yeah, he's not done." "I know." She looked out at the field wind brushing her hair. "I used to think if I ran far enough I'd be free. But you can't outrun men like him. You have to make them afraid to chase." "You did that today," Rhett said. Naomi glanced at him. "So did you." The barn doors creaked behind them, and Jed stepped out with a lantern. "Supper's ready." "Tell Eula we'll be in soon," Rhett said. Jed nodded and trotted off. Naomi turned to Rhett. You meant what you said about outlasting him. Rhett nodded. Emery's like rot. If you dig deep enough, you find his kind buried in every town. But rot doesn't stand long in the open. You shine enough light on it, it withers. Naomi took that in. I'm staying, she said. I didn't ask you to go, I know, but I'm saying it out loud now. He looked at her. You're part of this place, Naomi. She breathed in slow. Then let's make sure it stands. They walked back toward the house together, shoulder to shoulder. The air remained cold, but the sky above cracked with color, a sliver of red and amber breaking through the thick gray. Not much. Just enough to remind them morning always came. Even in the longest winters. Even when men like Emery circled like wolves. Inside, Eula had set the table with care, and Jed had tried his best to fix the loose leg on Naomi's chair. They all sat down without ceremony. No one said grace, but the silence between them was full of it. As they passed the cornbread and stew, Naomi reached into her pocket and held the hawk pendant for just a moment before letting it rest on the table. It didn't have to fly anymore. It had already landed. If a man's name means something, he won't let another man speak, lies over it, and call it truth. The wind carried a sharp scent of pine smoke and warning. Naomi sat on the back porch step, a chipped mug of coffee clutched between her cold fingers. The trees across the valley stood silent snow, draping their limbs like woven linen. Her breath came out in slow clouds as she watched Rhett working by the barn, mending the last gate Emery's riders had tried to tear down during the storm. Inside the house, Jed practiced carving again. Eula had set him to work with a new block of pine and a dull knife, hoping it would calm the jump in his hands. Ever since the confrontation with Emery, the boy had grown quieter, more watchful. Naomi understood that silence. It was the same one she carried when she left her old life behind, where every sound might be a threat in disguise. But something shifted that morning. News arrived. A rider from town, Elmer Hatch, who always smelled of tobacco and beans, brought word that Emery had gone to the county clerk's office again. This time he'd filed a formal complaint to dispute the deed to Rhett's land. The papers accused Rhett of forging boundaries, and worse, claimed Naomi was his unlawful accomplice. You've got till the week's end, Elmer said grimly, dismounting. Then the sheriff will be forced to act on it. Town's law says a dispute that serious needs settle in court or by removal. Naomi stared at the letter, her stomach hardening. He's trying to make us look like squatters. Rhett didn't speak for a long time. He stood on the porch, eyes on the seal stamped at the bottom of the paper. He's dragging our names through the dirt. Naomi folded the letter. Then we clean him off. That evening, Rhett rode into town alone. Naomi wanted to go with him, but he insisted she stay. If he plans something dirty, I won't risk both of us. Keep the house watched. She kissed his cheek. Don't let them twist who you are. Rhett's reply was steady. If a man's name means something, he won't let another man speak, lies over it, and call it truth. He rode out just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows that swallowed the barn. In town, Rhett tethered his horse near the general store and made his way to the sheriff's office. The saloon across the road buzzed with laughter and light, but every word felt hollow in contrast to the task ahead. Sheriff Baines looked up as Rhett entered, his mustache bristling like a broom. Heard you were coming, Baines muttered, motioning to the chair opposite. You want to talk about these charges? I want to end this before Emery turns it into something bloodier. Baines sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, Rhett, I believe you. Lord knows Emery's been circling like a buzzard for years, but law's law. I got a judge visiting next week. He's agreed to hear both sides if you show up, and if I don't, Sheriff's bound to enforce Emery's motion. That means sending deputies out to investigate, maybe even evict. Rhett's hands curled into fists on his thighs. I've got deeds, boundary maps, witnesses. Good. Bring it all. But prepare yourself, Emery won't fight fair. Rhett nodded. He never has. Before he left, he stopped by the church. Not for prayer, though he stood in the aisle beneath the quiet rafters for a long while. He wasn't asking for rescue. He was promising something, that he would not allow the home they built to be stolen, nor his woman to be smeared again. By the time he returned, Naomi had fortified the cabin. She'd built a hidden cache for documents behind the hearthstone-filled water barrels and kept the rifle polished near the back door. Jed had sharpened stakes and laid them near the fence line like they were preparing for siege. But when Rhett walked through the door, it wasn't with fear. It was with certainty. We fight this in the light, he said, spreading the court notice on the table. Not just for land, but for the right to be believed. Naomi stared at the letter. If he wins this, he won't stop at throwing us out. He'll brand us as thieves. Rhett looked at her jaw tense. That's why we show them what truth looks like when it walks through the door, instead of hiding in the shadows. The next few days passed in preparation. Naomi organized every paper. Rhett had old contracts, tax stubs, even notes scribbled by his late father marking the fence posts. Eula stitched a clean shirt for Rhett to wear, pressing it with hot stones and lavender to keep it crisp. Jed rode to Miss Penny's farm and asked her and her husband to stand as witnesses if needed. On the morning of the hearing, Naomi woke first. She stared at Rhett sleeping beside her, the slow rise and fall of his chest steadier than any clock. She brushed a hand through his hair, kissed his brow, and whispered, "You were made for this." Rhett stirred and caught her hand. So were you. They rode together into town side by side, not just husband and wife in spirit, but now in truth. The makeshift courtroom had been set up inside the town hall benches pulled from the schoolhouse, a judge seated behind the council desk, and townsfolk already gathered curious as crows. Emery arrived late, strutting like a rooster with Maris behind him. Rhett stood when his name was called, and Naomi stepped forward too. The judge, a wiry man with sharp spectacles and no patience for dramatics, asked for evidence. Naomi laid it out, each page crisp and in order. Dates matched, signatures confirmed, deeds unbroken. And when Emery stepped forward waving maps drawn by hand and declarations signed by old cousins and half-bought clerks, the difference was clear. Truth didn't shout. It stood firm. The judge sat back, scanning both sets of documents. I'll review all this tonight. My decision comes tomorrow morning. Naomi nodded. We'll be there. As they stepped out of the hall, the crowd parted for them. Not with awe, but with respect. And as they rode home, the snow began again, soft as ash. No words passed between them on the trail. They didn't need any. Truth had spoken once, and it would speak again. We didn't come here to win favor, we came here to prove we're not the kind you can run off, just because it's easier than facing the truth. The frost on the windows hadn't melted by morning. Naomi stood at the stove, stirring cornmeal mush, her eyes on the trail winding down the ridge. The courtroom verdict would be handed down today, and despite the calm that filled the house, the tension laced everything like a thread pulled too tight. Jed had dressed himself early, his shirt tucked and hair combed for the first time since he arrived. He said nothing as he ate, just kept glancing at the clock, like each tick might bring a different future. Rhett sat at the table polishing his boots, the silence between him and Naomi not uncomfortable, just heavy with shared understanding. She handed him the envelope they had prepared the night before, full of signed statements, receipts, and land records. Rhett slid it into his coat pocket and looked up. "You coming with me?" Naomi hesitated. "They already see me as the woman who disrupted their peace. You sure it helps to walk in beside me?" Rhett's jaw tightened. "I'm sure it matters that they know you're not afraid to." She gave a small nod, wiped her hands, and fetched her shawl. Together they stepped out into the morning chill, a quiet force against the noise to come. By the time they reached town, the crowd was thicker than before. Word had spread that a ruling was due, and curiosity had drawn half the county. There were ranchers from the outlying mesas townsfolk who depended on Emery's freight business, and even drifters hoping for a little drama. Emery stood out front with Maris clinging to his arm, her expression one of smug certainty. His lawyer, a man brought in from the capital, wore a hat too fine for the dust and a face too practiced to betray anything real. Sheriff Baines was already posted at the hall doors, arms crossed. When he saw Rhett and Naomi approach, he dipped his chin respectfully. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. The judge's desk had been cleared, a single folded paper placed neatly at its center. The townspeople settled fast when the judge entered, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He didn't waste time. In the matter of land ownership and fraud allegations filed against Rhett Colton and Naomi Colton, the judge began. "This court finds the claims submitted by Mr. Emery Dandridge to be inconsistent with public record and lacking in substantive proof." Gasps rippled through the room. Naomi kept her eyes on Emery. The vein in his temple twitched. The judge continued, voice clear. "The deeds in Mr. Colton's possession are verified as authentic. The land surveyed matches historical boundaries. No evidence supports the charge of forgery, nor the implication that Mrs. Colton acted unlawfully." He paused for effect, letting silence take hold. "Therefore, all charges are dismissed. No action will be taken against the Coltons. Further challenges must be made through appropriate state channels." Rhett didn't flinch. He merely stood straighter. The judge folded the paper and stood. "That's the word of the law. Let it be." As the crowd murmured, some in disappointment, others in quiet support, Rhett turned to Naomi. She reached for his hand and held it tightly. "We did it," she whispered. "No," he murmured back. "We just made it harder for them to deny what we've always known." Outside the courthouse, Emery was already unraveling. "You think this ends it?" he shouted, voice cracking with fury. "You think a paper from a small-town judge means anything?" Rhett didn't even turn, but Naomi did. Her voice was calm, but it cut like a blade. "We didn't come here to win favor. We came here to prove we're not the kind you can run off just because it's easier than facing the truth." Maris tugged Emery's sleeve, embarrassed by the onlookers gathering to witness his tantrum. His lawyer muttered something and stepped away, clearly done with the mess. As the Coltons mounted up and rode out, a few townsfolk nodded in their direction. One woman even tipped her bonnet. The shift was small, but it was real. Respect wasn't being handed out, but it was no longer withheld. Back at the ranch, Eula was already preparing supper. Jed rushed out to meet them, his eyes wide. "You won." Rhett lifted him high in the saddle before dismounting. We stood our ground. Naomi slipped inside to stoke the fire and wash up, but before she could settle, she heard a rider approaching fast. It was Miss Penny, out of breath, face pale. "There's a fire," she gasped. "West Ridge, near the timberline." Rhett's boots hit the porch before her sentence was done. "How bad?" "Spreading fast. Emery's old bunkhouse went up, then 2 sheds. If it crosses into the pine belt, it'll hit your property line by nightfall." Naomi's heart skipped. "Do we know how it started?" Miss Penny hesitated. "Some say they saw Maris heading out there yesterday with a lamp, and Emery had men clearing brush around the same time. Could have been an accident. could have been something else. Rhett turned to Naomi. Get Eula and Jed to the storm cellar. Keep the documents safe. Naomi nodded. You go, I'll head to the ridge. I won't let that fire take what we just defended. He mounted again, calling for water barrels and blankets. Naomi helped Penny into the house, her mind already racing. The trial was over, but Emery wasn't. He might have lost in the courtroom, but now he was playing a dirtier game, one that burned fast and left little behind. By sunset, smoke was curling in from the west. Naomi stood with Jed on the porch, staring at the distant haze, her hand gripping the rifle. Rhett was out there somewhere fighting a fire Emery may have set, with the same bitterness he used to poison people's opinions. But Naomi knew this truth now. Emery's power came not from land or title, but from fear. And they weren't afraid anymore. As the first glowing embers floated on the wind toward the ranch, she stepped off the porch, looked at Jed, and said quietly, Go fetch water. We're going to protect what's ours. They had fought for their names in town. Now they would fight for their home in the flames. Smoke thickened in the sky as twilight bled into dusk. The air had turned dry and electric heavy, with the hiss and crackle of approaching danger. Naomi could smell the burn now, pine needles sap dry brush. The land itself groaned under the weight of fire. The wind was shifting, erratic and cruel. Each gust carried embers like vengeful ghosts, casting tiny glowing flecks onto the fields near the edge of their property. Jed stood by the pump, working the handle like his life depended on it, sweat streaking his face. Naomi soaked burlap sacks and handed them to him. They lined the edge of the barn roof, and the wooden fencing a flimsy defense against an enemy that didn't negotiate. Rhett hadn't returned yet. That silence gnawed at her more than the smoke did. He'd ridden toward the west ridge with a few volunteers and water barrels trying to cut a trench ahead of the fire line. But it was fast, wild, and indiscriminate. And Emery, damn him, had disappeared into the chaos. Naomi tied her scarf tighter over her nose and mouth. Eula was inside, huddled with Miss Penny and a trembling Jed, who kept pretending he wasn't scared. Naomi had tried sending them to the storm cellar twice. Eula refused both times. Not while you're out here alone, she had said, and her voice had cracked for the first time in years. Naomi didn't argue. She needed them to believe in her strength, even if her knees quaked beneath her. Every creak in the trees sent her eyes darting. Every shift of wind brought her back to the porch, rifle in hand, watching for flame or shadow. The dog barked sharply, then went quiet. Then hoofbeats. Naomi turned, heart leaping. It was Rhett, covered in soot, face streaked with ash, shirt torn at the shoulder. He rode fast and slid off his horse before the animal fully stopped. It's bad, he said hoarsely. Jumped the line twice. We held it near the creek, but it's coming around the bluff now faster than we can stop it. And Emery? He set more than a fire. Naomi stiffened. What do you mean? Rhett pulled a small charred notebook from his coat. One of the boys found this near the West Trail. Emery had maps, plans. Not just for the fire, but for salting the land-burning evidence, driving us out completely. He didn't have to say it aloud. Arson wasn't just retaliation. It was strategy. If the land couldn't be proven livable, if crops failed, if soil tested poor, they'd lose everything in the long term, no matter what the judge had said. He doesn't just want to ruin us, Naomi muttered. He wants to erase us. A sharp crack split the air, not gunfire. Rhett's hand went to his sidearm. That came from the creek bend. Naomi's pulse surged. That's where the livestock troughs are. Another shot, then a distant shout. Without hesitation, Rhett swung back onto his horse. Naomi grabbed her rifle. I'm coming too. No, she cut him off. You think I'm staying back after all this? After defending this place inch by inch, if Emery is out there, if he's still trying to light matches while the fire does his dirty work, then I'm going to face him. Rhett didn't argue again. They rode hard past the orchard, where smoke licked the leaves past the outer fence already singed. When they reached the trough area, the scene before them froze time. Emery stood near the fence lantern raised, trying to light a third pile of kindling. Beside him, two of his men stood nervously unsure whether to follow orders or flee the fire pressing close behind. Across from them, Miss Penny, God bless her, stood with a double-barrel shotgun in trembling hands, her bonnet halfway off, eyes wide and wild. "Drop it!" Emery Rhett yelled, drawing his revolver. Emery spun, startled. "This is my land!" He screamed, sweat and rage making his face almost unrecognizable. "This was supposed to be mine. Your father promised me he promised you a deal. You failed him and tried to steal it back. That's not a promise, it's betrayal." Naomi leveled her rifle, voice steady. "And you're not taking another inch. You've already set the fields ablaze. Don't burn your soul with it." For a second, the world held its breath. Emery looked between them, hand twitching near his coat pocket. Then Penny cocked the shotgun. "Try it, Emery. I will not hesitate." Rhett dismounted and walked forward slowly, gun still raised. "This ends here. You turn yourself in. You face what you did. I'd rather rot in flames than be judged by the likes of you," Emery hissed. Then he flung the lantern at the kindling, but Naomi fired first. The bullet shattered the lantern mid-air, spraying oil and glass harmlessly to the dirt. It flared for a second, then sputtered out. Rhett tackled Emery as he lunged again, pinning him in the dust. The two men struggled, but Emery was no match for months of hard ranch labor and fire lines. Rhett had the cuffs from the saddlebag on his wrists in seconds. By the time the sheriff and his deputies arrived, guided by the smoke and gunfire, the flames had begun to shift west again. The creek trench had done its work, and now with Emery in custody and evidence in hand, justice had more weight behind it. Naomi watched Emery being loaded into the wagon, his face no longer full of hate but something sadder loss. Not of land, but of legacy. Penny sat down hard on a rock, shaking. Naomi sat beside her, both women staring at the trees, now silhouetted by flickering firelight, but no longer rushing toward them. "We were never supposed to survive this," Naomi whispered. "Not the fire, not the lies, not the town." Penny gave a tired smile. "But you did. And more than that, you stood taller than any man in it." Naomi looked toward the ranch, smoke curling around its edges like a warning that hadn't won. "We didn't just fight to stay," she said. "We fought to be seen." And as the moon rose behind a haze of ash, its light shimmered off wet fields and scorched trails, Naomi knew this battle had scorched something clean. Not just the land, but the past. What remained was theirs, hard-earned, and ready to be built upon. The court might have ruled on paper, Naomi said, her voice low as sunrise crept over the ridge, but we earned this land in ash, sweat, and blood. And no man can take that from us now. The morning after the fire brought a strange silence, almost too still, like the land itself was stunned. The barn still stood scorched at the corners, but intact. Half the orchard was blackened. The south pasture was nothing but smoldering dirt and fence posts. Yet the house still rose from the earth like a battered sentinel. The children were safe. The land was theirs, and Emery was behind bars. Naomi stood barefoot on the porch, mug in hand, staring out at the wreckage that somehow still resembled home. Her fingers ached from gripping tools, her shoulders sore from swinging buckets. But it was the emotional weight that pressed heaviest. There had been so many moments in the past week when she thought they wouldn't make it. And now, they had. Behind her, Eula stepped out quietly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You didn't sleep," Naomi said, not needing to ask. "Did you?" Naomi shook her head. "I don't think I could if I tried." Eula followed her gaze to the fields. "It's not gone. Not all of it." "No, but it's different now." Naomi's voice cracked. "Feels like it all came to a head, and now I don't know how to breathe without fighting." They stood quietly together for a while before Eula said, "There's still the hearing next week. You ready to testify?" Naomi exhaled slowly. "I will be." The fire had made everything painfully clear. Emery's attempt to destroy the land wasn't just personal, it was a final, desperate move to rewrite his failure. And now that he'd been arrested in the act, the legal case stood stronger than ever. But Naomi didn't want to win with court orders. She wanted to win with dignity, with truth. Sheriff Boyd had stopped by the evening prior, leaving copies of Emery's confiscated journals. Naomi had read every word under the flicker of oil light. His resentment went back years, anger that their father had ever let Rhett back into his life, bitterness that his own mismanagement had led to foreclosure. He'd spoken of Naomi like she was a squatter, a thief, a stain on the family legacy. And yet it was Emery who had tried to burn it down. Naomi tucked the memory away. There would be time for justice. Right now, there was rebuilding to do. Rhett arrived by mid-morning, a battered tool belt slung over his shoulder and a determined look in his eyes. He brought 2 neighbors with him, Dale, a stout man with a limp, and Lorraine, who smelled of peppermint and wood smoke. They heard about the fire, Rhett explained, and figured you could use some hands. Naomi blinked back emotion. "You've no idea." She hadn't expected the townsfolk to come. Most had turned their backs weeks ago. But something about surviving the fire changed people. Even those who had doubted them were beginning to see it differently. The sheriff's report had made its rounds. Emery's guilt was undeniable, and Naomi's refusal to leave had become legend. By lunchtime, a handful more arrived, Miss Flora, with sandwiches, the young Thomason boy carrying nails and hammers. They began repairing the west fence. Penny supervised from the porch, wrapped in a shawl and issuing orders like a general. The ranch was coming back to life piece by piece. Later, Naomi walked the fields with Rhett. He showed her where the orchard had caught flame, but miraculously spared the bee boxes. He talked of planting rye in the burned sections to heal the soil, of rotating cattle slower this year to allow for regrowth. She listened, nodding, but her heart still thumped heavy. "You think we can do it?" she asked, finally stopping near the creek where the last trench had held. Rhett turned to her. "We already are." He knelt beside the soil, rubbing it between his fingers. "This ground's scorched," he said, "but it ain't dead. And neither are we." Naomi dropped beside him. "It feels like we've lost so much, yeah, but we kept what matters." He looked her square in the eye. "We kept each other. We kept this family." She looked down at her hands, calloused and blackened with ash. "I've never felt this tired. I know, but you're not alone anymore, and you don't have to carry it all." Her eyes brimmed. For the first time since the inheritance hearing, she let them fall. Rhett wrapped an arm around her shoulders and she leaned into it. It wasn't romantic. It was survival. Recognition. A bond forged in fire, literal and otherwise. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Naomi sat with the children on the porch. Jed rested against her side, his fingers still sticky with molasses from the cornbread Penny had made. Eula was sketching something in her journal, rebuilding plans, she said, but wouldn't show anyone just yet. The others trickled home. The tools were stored, the animals fed. For once, the night felt like it belonged to them. Naomi watched the stars appear one by one, faint but steady. A breeze carried the scent of earth and smoke, but it no longer choked her. It smelled like rebirth. Rhett sat beside her, a cup of strong coffee in hand. "You think they'll believe you?" he asked softly. Naomi took a long breath. "It doesn't matter if they believe me. I'm going to tell the truth anyway." He nodded, and she did believe it mattered, deeply. But she also understood something now: truth didn't require permission. It stood on its own, whether embraced or ignored, and she had earned her place to speak it. In the quiet that followed, Naomi thought about everything that had led to this moment: the betrayals, the lies, the inheritance fight, the fire. It had all burned away the pretense. What remained was this porch, this soil, these people, and her voice. She would use it next week. Stand in that courthouse with soot still in her skin and tell them exactly what it meant to fight for land, not for greed, but for legacy. Not for revenge, but for hope. Because no judge could hand that down. It had to be lived, and they had lived it. Together. She stood on that witness stand with soot still behind her nails and truth in her voice, and I swear to heaven even the judge leaned forward to listen. The courthouse sat square in the middle of the town Naomi had grown to both fear and fight for. It looked smaller now, less imposing as she stepped up the worn concrete stairs flanked by Rhett and Eula. Her shoulders were squared, her boots were dusted clean, and the wide-brimmed hat she wore shaded a face set in solemn determination. Inside the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Locals sat elbow to elbow, many of them the same who once cast side-eyes in her direction. But now they came to see something else. Maybe it was justice. Maybe it was curiosity. But they were here. And Naomi didn't flinch beneath their gaze. Emery sat to the left, shoulders slouched, jaw-tight, eyes ringed with the bruises of sleeplessness and guilt. His lawyer, a stiff man from out of town, barely looked at Naomi as she took her seat. The judge called order and the proceedings began. Naomi's stomach twisted only once when the bailiff called her name, but when she stood and stepped toward the witness box, it was as if something older, deeper, steadier rose up inside her. She wasn't walking alone. Every blistered inch of her land, every tear Eula shed, every lash of betrayal, they walked with her. She took her oath, sat, folded her hands. The courtroom quieted as if sensing the moment. The prosecutor, a lean woman named Macy Finch, began gently. "Ms. Runnels, can you tell us what happened the night of the fire?" Naomi's voice was low but steady. The dogs started barking around midnight. I looked out and saw flames near the barn. My brother Emery, he was running from it, with a gas can. Gasps echoed. Emery's lawyer rose to object, but the judge overruled. "Did you speak to your brother that night?" Macy continued. "I did. I begged him to stop. He told me he should have torn it all down years ago. Said I didn't deserve it. That it was never mine." Macy walked slowly to the center of the courtroom. "And what would you say to that?" Naomi met Emery's eyes. It wasn't his either, not the way he treated it. "You don't own something you try to destroy." The silence was heavier now. Even Emery looked away. Macy held up one of the journals found in Emery's truck. "Is this your brother's handwriting?" Naomi nodded. "Yes." "Would you read the highlighted section aloud?" Naomi took the book. Her hand shook just slightly as she read. "If Naomi thinks I'll let her take that land like she took my name, she's wrong. If I can't have it, no one will." There was a pause. A rustling among the pews. Miss Runnels Macy said gently, "What does that land mean to you?" Naomi exhaled through her nose, her voice soft but sharp. "It's not just soil. It's not acres on a deed. That land is the last of my mama's prayers, my daddy's sweat. It's the place my children sleep and where their laughter rebuilt what grief once hollowed out. It's home, and I've fought for it every single day since he tried to take it. Macy nodded. Thank you. Cross-examination came as cold as expected. Emery's lawyer tried to paint Naomi as bitter, unfit, emotional. You claim to be the rightful heir, yet you moved in without full legal transfer. I moved in because the house was falling to pieces, Naomi cut in. Because no one else would. Because Emery left it to rot, just like he did the rest of us. The judge glanced down, unmoved by the attempt to rattle her. And your brother, do you claim he was always violent? No, but pain has a way of festering when it's not faced. And Emery, he never faced his. The lawyer hesitated, then rested. Naomi was excused. Back on the bench beside Rhett, her legs trembled. But inside her chest, a fire of a different kind had taken hold. This one didn't consume, it cleared. By afternoon, closing statements were made. Macy stood, hands behind her back. This is not just a case about arson, she said. It's about intention. About harm disguised as inheritance. About a man who tried to destroy the very thing he once called home. And a woman who stood between fire and family who refused to run. Naomi looked to Eula, who squeezed her hand. The judge announced that he would issue his ruling the following morning. The courtroom emptied, but no one moved too fast. Something sacred had settled over the space. Outside, the air was sharp with late-season wind. Naomi stood at the courthouse steps, face lifted toward a sky the color of bruised lavender. I feel like I finally said it all, she whispered. You did, Rhett said, coming beside her. And they heard you. Back at the ranch that night, the house hummed with quiet energy. The children drew pictures of the courtroom complete with tiny gavel and judge's bench. Eula taped one to the kitchen wall. Naomi sat by the fire boots off ankles sore. But her heart felt clean. Not light, there was too much history for that, but clean. Rhett brought her a glass of water and sat beside her. You were remarkable, he said. She smiled, not from pride, but peace. It's not over yet. No, he agreed. But it's close. She looked toward the window where the horizon glowed with the final edge of sunset. Tomorrow a judge would decide what they already knew in their bones. She had not stolen this land. She had saved it. From fire. From silence. From erasure. And no matter what came next, the truth had been spoken and heard. The educational lesson learned from this story is that standing up for what is right may be exhausting and isolating, but truth spoken with courage can shift even the most stubborn hearts. Family wounds run deep, yet healing often begins when one person chooses integrity over silence. Sometimes the home we fight for isn't just a place, it's a legacy, a promise and a reason to endure. Holding on to that, especially in the face of betrayal, can become a light for others lost in the dark.